Hello, everybody. It's me. I'm back, and I hope that you're back too. And I want to start reading you a new book from an author that I love. It's the same author that wrote Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I'm hoping that you are willing to listen in. I'll try and read a chapter each day and put it up on YouTube. And I'll make sure that your teachers know how to contact you about it. And if you're watching right now, you already know. So I also hope that you and your families are happy and healthy and safe and having a lot of fun, because while we're stuck at home, it's really important to take a lot of breaks from schoolwork, get outside in the fresh air, run around and play. I'm doing that a lot with my family, and it helps. It helps to not feel cooped up in cabin fever and all that stuff that doesn't feel too good. Anyway, I'll give you more on that later. I'm building a tree house actually with my wife for our son. It's coming along great, and maybe I'll show you a little picture of that soon. But let me start with the actual video. The book. Okay. How do I... So, the book here is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's by Roald Dahl and illustrated by a man named Quentin Blake.
Yeah, I was crying, Dad, in the bedroom.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, and I was crying because I wanted the rover one.
You wanted the rover one?
Oh, the rover one. The rover run. Rover run.
I'm not sure what that is.
It's in the bedroom.
Uh-huh.
I wanted it. Dad, can you get those out and put it on the top of the waffle?
I think you need to follow Mama's rules.
Okay. On top level.
Yeah. I'm starting reading a book to my students. Do you want to be here while I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. And let's read the back. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie Bucket loves chocolate. And Mr. Wonka, the most wondrous inventor in the world, is opening the gates of his amazing chocolate factory to 5 lucky children. It's the prize of a lifetime. Gobstoppers, wriggle sweets, and a river of melted chocolate delight await. Charlie needs just one golden ticket, and these delicious treats could all be his. Now, I know that some of you might have read this book or watched the movie or heard about it. It's a classic.
Why not? Why not?
Veruca Salt. Well, she's looking up at something, who knows what. Introducing Charlie Bucket, Mr. Willy Wonka, Augustus Gloop, Mike Teavee, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregard, and the Oompa Loompas. So you can listen to my voice as I read it. You can read the pages. You can pause the video and read it on your own. Whatever works. Chapter 1. Here comes Charlie. These 2 very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these 2 very old people are father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. And this is Mr. Bucket. And this is Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He is pleased to meet you. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket, live together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town.
Where did wooden house go?
The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired they never got out of it. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine on this side, Grandpa George
And they woke them up.
and Grandma Georgina on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room, upon mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house. You guys sit back, okay? Or even 1 more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that.
Yes.
Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory, where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps onto the tops of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked, and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food.
Are you done with your phone call? Are you done with your phone calls? Are you done with your phone calls?
There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping of food. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their share of lunch or supper so that they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. Ugh. The only thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking bars of creamy chocolate out of their pockets and munching them greedily, and that, of course, was pure torture. Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with 1 small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as though it were a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never to touch it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel away back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate, and then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on, and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his 6-penny bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. But I haven't yet told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing, for him, was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching bars of creamy chocolate right in front of him. It was the most terrible torturing thing you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it, and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside it. And outside the walls, for half a mile around, in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of this gorgeous, chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Now, if you'd like to do a little activity, after every chapter, I'm going to ask you to stop and jot or think about something. I know you've got notebooks and pencils, so take a moment to take that out, and you can pause the video. Now, it's important to think about the main character. At the beginning of every book, it always introduces the character or the characters. In this case, I want you to think a lot about Charlie Bucket. I want you to think about him. What are 3 things that you can think of right now that are very important about Charlie that we need to keep in mind as we keep reading this book? I'll give you one example. Charlie Bucket, even though he's very poor, he still has his imagination, and he thinks about his favorite thing a lot, and that is chocolate. Now you can think of at least 2 other things that are important about him and write them down, because as we continue to read, we're going to need to be able to remember those important things about Charlie. It's going to help us to enjoy the book and to learn a lot more about it. Okay, I'll tune in tomorrow here on YouTube